Welcome to our Bible study Sunday school hour here at Southwest Park Baptist Church. We're continuing in our study of Isaiah. Our lesson this week is entitled God Renews. God provides strength for those who trust in Him. We are moving from chapter 39 to chapter 40 this week, and that's a big transition. As the expositor's commentary says, this transition has produced more scholarly literature than any other part of the Old Testament. And the issue is that the first 39 chapters deal with events that occurred during Isaiah's lifetime. But as we move into chapter 40 and chapters 40 through 66, the period of time that he's talking about is 150 years later, or more than that even, in some cases. And so there are those who say that, well, that's just not possible. And so they theorize that these chapters were written by someone else. Some call it the second Isaiah. And some even postulate that there are three different authors. The Sunday school literature, our lesson writers, the expositor's commentary, the Warren Wiersbe, those people that I go to regularly for resources, all take the view that the whole book of Isaiah is written by one person, and that in chapters 40 through 66, he is simply looking ahead, and God has revealed to him things that are going to happen in the future. So that's where I'll be coming from in these later chapters here. To kind of introduce these chapters, I'm going to borrow from Warren Wiersbe, who says the book of Isaiah can be called a Bible in miniature. There are 66 books in the Bible. There are 66 chapters in Isaiah. There are 39 books in the Old Testament, and there are 39 chapters in the first part of Isaiah. Both the first 39 chapters in Isaiah and the Old Testament focus primarily on God's judgment of sin. There are 27 books in the New Testament, and there are 27 chapters in the latter part of Isaiah. In both those cases, in the New Testament and in the last 27 chapters in Isaiah, the focus and the emphasis is on the grace of God. So, the primary figure that we've looked at in the first 39 chapters in terms of the world scene and the opposition to Israel is Sennacherib, the Assyrian king. In these chapters 40 through 66, the world leader is Cyrus, king of Persia. And it was Cyrus who defeated the Babylonians, and sometime around 540 BC, he issued the decree that allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and to Judah and to rebuild the city and the temple there. The Jewish rabbis have called this part of the book, Isaiah 40 through 66, the book of consolation. And that's a good name for it. Isaiah sought to comfort the Jewish remnant in Babylon after their difficult years of captivity, and to assure them that God was with them and would take them safely home. So, as we look through this, we'll see all of those things. We'll see the messages of hope and comfort and encouragement. Note how many times as we go through these chapters that God says to the people of Israel, "Fear not." and how frequently he assures them of his pardon and his presence. So, it's no surprise that God's people for centuries have turned to these chapters to find assurance and encouragement in the difficult times of life. For in these difficult days and in these messages, God says to all of his people, take comfort in who I am. And we will see that today. We're in the 40th chapter. My study Bible captions chapter 40, the greatness of God. One commentary that I looked at entitled it, How Great Thou Art. So it emphasizes who God is and God's greatness. We're going to pick up with the 18th verse in the 40th chapter. But as usual, we need to kind of take a look at those first 17 verses quickly to kind of set the stage there. The people of Judah are in captivity in Babylon. As we know, they were overrun by the Babylonians, and many of them were carried off to Babylon in 3 different deportations, I guess you would say, there, and that culminated in 586 BC with the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And now, toward the end of that period, Isaiah here, looking ahead, speaks to them and gives them these words of comfort. As the Israelites in Babylon look back, they could see only failure and sin, and they needed encouragement. So in these first 11 verses here in chapter 40, we see 4 voices heard, each of them with a special message for these needy people. First of all, the voice of pardon. Look at verses 1 and 2. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem. Call out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So God speaks words of pardon here. Call out to her that her warfare has ended, her iniquity has been removed. In verses 3 through 5, we see the voice of providence, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. He says, prepare the way of the Lord. Talks about crooked places being made straight, rough places smooth, and the glory of the Lord being revealed. In verses 6 through 8, we see the voice of promise. Earthly things are temporary, including physical life, but the things of God are forever. Verse 8 is that very familiar verse. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. And then finally in verses 9 through 11, the voice of peace. Listen to those verses. Get yourself up on a high mountain, O Zion, bearer of good news. Lift up your voice mightily, O Jerusalem, bearer of good news. Lift it up, do not fear. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. Behold, the Lord God will come with might, with his arm ruling for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. Like a shepherd, he will tend his flock. In his arm he will gather the lambs, and carry them in his bosom. He will gently lead the nursing ewes. So, the voices of pardon, providence, promise, and peace we see in these 11 verses. In verses 12 through 17, God asserts his sovereignty. And it's interesting in those verses, if you look at them, he does that by a series of questions. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Who has marked off the heavens by the span? And he goes on in that vein. Very similar to the questions that he asked Job in Job 38 when he's demonstrating who he is and his authority. So God asserts that he is sovereign and he alone is sovereign. Now, our focal passage for this week, verses 18 through 31, serve as a kind of a conclusion to these first 17 verses. We saw in those verses how Isaiah offered voices of encouragement to a discouraged and downtrodden people. In these verses, Isaiah emphasizes the greatness of God and the fact that God is the one and only true God, and he is what they can turn to, what they can trust in, what they can depend on. So we pick up in verse 18, and let's look at verses 18 through 20. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness will you compare with him? As for the idol, a craftsman casts it, a goldsmith plates it with gold, and a silversmith fashions chains of silver. He who is too impoverished for such an offering selects a tree that does not rot. He seeks out for himself a skilled craftsman to prepare an idol that will not totter. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness will you compare with him? If we can ascribe human characteristics to God, and that's one of the ways that we kind of understand our relationship with God, this comes across as kind of biting sarcasm here. Rhetorical. To whom will you liken God? What likeness will you compare with him? Well, the answer is obvious. There is no comparison, and there is no one that is like God. And it's interesting that Isaiah uses the word likeness here, because that word takes us all the way back to the creation of man. Adam and Eve, and indeed all of us, were and are created in the image and likeness of God. And yet, humankind has always been compelled, has been tempted to make a likeness of God or a God and worship it. So the question comes, why would mankind worship something that he has himself made? Why wouldn't people worship the one who created them? In the next two verses, he goes ahead and kind of expands on that question. Our lesson writer makes the point that choosing to worship an idol is utterly foolish, since people control the process of making it from beginning to end. And it's obvious that an idol has no power at all. It doesn't move, it doesn't speak, it has no power. But just to make sure that everyone gets the point, Isaiah described the process of making the idol. He says, first some artisan crafted a mold and cast the image using some relatively inexpensive metal. And next, to kind of dress it up, the image was covered in a precious metal, gold in Isaiah's example here. And then it was decorated with silver chains. And I think I read somewhere that sometimes those silver chains were used to hold the idol upright to make sure that it didn't fall over. So these additions set the item apart from everyday items, but it's still just an object that man's created, like jewelry or art. In verse 20, Isaiah contrasts the poor man's idol. He finds a piece of wood that'll be durable and not rot, and then he seeks out another craftsman who will carve out an idol that will not fall over. Do you catch the irony there of the idol maker having to worry about his God falling over. Perhaps Isaiah had in mind here the circumstance of the Philistine god Dagon falling over in the temple when he wrote this. 1 Samuel 5 records for us, now the Philistines had captured the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. And then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the temple of Dagon and placed it beside Dagon. When the Ashdodites got up early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. When they got up early in the morning the next day, there was Dagon fallen again with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. The head of Dagon and the palms of his two hands were cut off, lying at the threshold. Only the body of Dagon was left. So he just fell over. So he's in Isaiah's example here in verse 20 of the poor person's idol, he seeks a skilled craftsman who can make an idol that won't totter, won't fall over, won't topple. So, out of these verses, what's the value of the prayer of a poor man to a plain idol? Or what's the value of a rich man, the value of the prayer of a rich man to an idol covered with gold? Well, the answer is the same in both cases. There is no value. Okay, so Isaiah moves on in verses 21 through 26 from that picture of the idols and the likening and the likeness of God to describing the sovereign Creator. Verses 21 through 26. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown, scarcely has their stock taken root in the earth, but He merely blows on them and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble. To whom then will you liken me that I would be His equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their host by number. He calls them all by name because of the greatness of His might and the strength of His power. Not one of them is missing. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Isaiah continues here with his pattern of rhetorical questions. In effect here, he's asking them, are you ignorant of God's nature? Do you not know? Have you not heard? As God's chosen people, they would have heard time and again the stories about God, His character, the covenant. Israel's very existence as a people was tied to God's activity. So when He says, do you not know, have you not heard, has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Certainly it had, and they should have heard. They should have known here. They should have understood. Then in verse 22, it is He who sits above the circle of the earth here. So Isaiah emphasizes the Lord is enthroned above the circle of the earth. God is above and separate from His creation. What exactly is meant by the circle of the earth? I believe I read somewhere that this is the only time that phrase is used in the Scripture, and it's not entirely clear what Isaiah meant. Could be a reference to the horizon or a picture of the sun moving across the sky from horizon to horizon. There is some similar language in Proverbs 8:27 When he established the heavens, there I was. When he drew a circle upon the face of the deep. But the point is that God is separate from his creation and is indeed greater than what he has created. In contrast to God's power and sovereignty, the people on earth are like grasshoppers, he said. Isaiah uses that image there to show how insignificant people are in comparison to the Creator God. So, how can humans think that they can control God? In the last part of verse 22, Isaiah continues to describe God's relationship with the world that he created. He says he stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to live in. So it's like the universe is like a tool in his hands to use at his pleasure. In verse 23, he moves on to earthly rulers. He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Since God is creator, he's the one who reduces princes or rulers to nothing. There's parallel thoughts there. He reduces rulers to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Some of your translations there will say a wasteland. The word that's translated meaningless or wasteland is one of the words that means formless or void, going back again to the creation when the earth was described as, or the creation was described as formless and void until God set things in order as he created. So as creator, God can make leaders, he can unmake them. Earthly leaders have no power apart from what God allows. And it's significant here that Isaiah asserts that God's in charge even when it seems like human leaders are calling the shot. And certainly we need to remember that as events unfold in our world today. God allows no man, no matter how great, to further his ambitions without limit. His absolute control over all human life is unchallenged. In verse 24, Isaiah says that these leaders are like plants that only last for a season. And the image that he uses here in verse 24 is similar to what he used back in chapter 6 to describe all of humanity. The Holman Christian Standard Bible translates this verse, they are barely planted, barely sown. Their stem hardly takes root in the ground when he blows on them and they wither and a whirlwind carries them away. Even as people are like grass or grasshoppers, earthly leaders are like vegetation that sprouts and quickly dies. Even the most impactful human leaders are in power for a relatively short time, and they have a negligible effect compared to God's tenure. Verse 25 follows the pattern of verse 18 by introducing a rhetorical question with one big difference. In verse 18, Isaiah asks the question, but here God asks the question. The question is simple. Who can you compare to God? He says, to whom then will you liken me, that I would be his equal, says the Holy One. Again, it's a rhetorical question because the answer is understood. No one can be likened to God. No one is his equal. And just as verse 25 echoes verse 19, verse 26 echoes verses 19 and 20. Verse 26 presents God as the creator of the heavens with specific emphasis on the stars. The assertion had huge implications for Isaiah's audience, because in ancient Near East religions, the heavens and the stars were thought to represent the gods. Yet here, Isaiah tells them that God created the stars, He numbered them, and He calls them by name. So think about this. Is it more impressive for multiple people working together to craft a lifeless idol, or for God to create the stars, number them, and call them by name? No wonder God said, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars." Verses 27 through 31 concludes this chapter. "Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, He increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." Jacob and Israel are different names for the same group of people, and that's God's chosen people. The name Jacob occurs about 40 times in Isaiah, and about 2/3 of those are in these latter chapters, chapters 40 through 66. Perhaps in this part of the prophecy, it brings to mind Jacob's experience, because after he stole the birthright from Esau, he fled and was exiled from his homeland for many years. And in Genesis 31:13, God said to Jacob, "I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a stone pillar, where you have made a vow to me. Now get up, go out from this land, and return to the land of your birth." And now, similarly, God is telling His chosen people, get up, return to the land of promise. It's time. In the language here in verse 27 suggests that the people were kind of bringing God down to their level. They're thinking He's either forgetful, He's forgotten about us, He's tired, He's unconcerned, and you can understand why they might think that. They've been uprooted for their land. The temple's destroyed. They're off in a strange place. And so it might be kind of natural for them to think that God has forgotten about them or deserted them, doesn't care about them. But He makes it plain that that's not the case. While God's people may have felt abandoned, that was simply not the case, and God lets them know that in no uncertain terms. And again, that language, that distinctive language, do you not know, have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. And the implication there is that even in their discouragement and their despair, they should have known that. God had told them and demonstrated to them that He was Creator of all. And God certainly does not get distracted because He is tired. He knows all, and no detail escapes Him. And that certainly included the plight of His people. Verse 29, he asserts that he gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. God is the source of strength when we grow weary and when life threatens to overwhelm us. Youth and vigorous young men epitomize human strength. As we grow older, we think back and we wish we had the energy and the strength and all of those things that we did when we were young. And yet even youth and vigorous young men get tired and stumble badly. But verse 31 is a beautiful promise to all of us, as it was a promise to the Israeli captives in Babylon. Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. So what does it mean to wait for the Lord? Or some of your translations there will use the term to hope in the Lord. And the word wait or hope there implies both trust and patience. Trust involves confidence in God's power to deliver and faith that He will keep His promise. Hoping in the Lord also implies the patience to wait for God's promises to be fulfilled, since God works according to His own timing. To wait entails confident expectation and active hope in the Lord. Never just passive resignation. It doesn't mean we just sit down and kind of hunker down. Psalm 41 says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined to me. He heard my cry for help. And so He brought me up from the roaring pit, from the miry clay, and He put my feet upon a rock. He made my steps steady. He uses the terms here, mount up, run, walk. That describes the spiritual transformation that faith brings to a person. The Lord gives power to those who trust in Him. The eagle depicts the strength that comes from the Lord. He says they will mount up with wings like eagles. The Lord describes the deliverance of the Israelites in Exodus 19:4 as being similar to being lifted up on an eagle's strong wings. Psalm 103 is another good example. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that's within me. Bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and do not forget all His benefits. Who forgives all your iniquity? Who heals all your diseases? Who redeems your life from the pit? Who crowns you with loyal love and mercies? Who satisfies your life with good, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles? I like Warren Wiersbe's commentary on these last verses here. He says, instead of praising the Lord, the nation was complaining to Him that He acted as though He did not know their situation or have any concern for their problems. Instead of seeing the open door, the Jews saw only the long road before them, and they complained that they didn't have strength for the journey. God was asking them to do the impossible. But God knows how we feel and what we fear, and He's adequate to meet our every need. We can never obey God in our own strength, but we can always trust Him to provide the strength we need. Paul said in Philippians 4:13, I'm able to do all things by the one who strengthens me. If we trust ourselves, we will faint and fall. But if we wait on the Lord by faith, we'll receive strength for the journey. The word wait does not suggest that we sit around and do nothing. It means to hope, to look to God for all that we need. Waiting and hoping is not some vague wish that something might happen, but it's rather a confident expectation that the Lord will fulfill His promises. If you were in church last Sunday and you heard Brother Derbyshire's sermon, he preached from Isaiah 26. And in Isaiah 26:8, there's this beautiful statement, "O Lord, we have waited for you." Same kind of thing. The desire of our soul is for your name and for the remembrance of you. In Isaiah 30:18, "Therefore the Lord will be gracious to you, and therefore He will rise up to show you mercy. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for Him." So, waiting on the Lord, hoping in the Lord, involves meditating on His character and His promise, praying, seeking to glorify Him, and putting our trust in Him. He says, not only wait on the Lord, those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. Their strength will be renewed, some of your translations say. And the word renew there, or gain, means to exchange, like taking off old clothes and putting on new. We exchange our weakness for His power. As we wait before Him, God enables us to soar when there's a crisis, to run when the challenges are many, and to walk faithfully in the day-by-day demands of life. And Brother Wiersbe makes the point, it's much harder to walk in the ordinary pressures of life than to fly like the eagle in the time of crisis. In the time of crisis, we tend to turn to God. We focus on God. But in the mundane, day-to-day circumstances of life, sometimes it's harder to walk. William Carey said, "I can plod. That's my only genius. I can persevere in any definite pursuit. To this I owe everything." The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. The greatest heroes of faith are not always those who seem to be soaring. Often it's those who are patiently plodding. As we wait on the Lord, He enables us not only to fly higher and run faster, but also to walk longer. Blessed are the plodders, for they eventually arrive at their destination. I don't know about you, but that kind of encourages me, because that's kind of what I am. I'm a plodder. There's not much exciting going on, just going day by day, trying to do the best that we can. And that's when we trust in God, I think God uses that. Isaiah 41 is also part of our larger scripture lesson this week, and it explains how this future deliverance that God promises in chapter 40 would play out. And God makes it clear that He would work through the existing institutions to accomplish His task. And again, very often we want to look for the spectacular and the miraculous, but most often God works through normal events and normal people, the plotters, if you will. But there's a beautiful promise in chapter 41, verses 8 through 10, and we'll close with that today. He says, "But you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I've chosen, you, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I grasped from the ends of the earth and called from its remotest parts and told you are my servant. I have chosen you and I have not rejected you. You must not fear, for I am with you. You must not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Indeed, I will help you. Indeed, I will take hold of you with the right hand of my salvation. That's a wonderful promise for all of us. I have chosen you, and I have not rejected you. You must not fear, for I am with you. You must not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Indeed, I will help you. Let's claim that promise in our lives.